Hello, and welcome to the podcast. This is Get in the Driver's Seat. We're telling stories about leadership moments in small to mid-sized professional practices. I'm your host, Sandra Beckwar, practice management coach at Beckwar Management. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Fotini Iconomopoulos, best-selling author of HarperCollins' Say Less, Get More. Here it is for those on YouTube. Unconventional negotiation techniques to get what you want. How I wish I had this book earlier in my career.
I think we all feel that way.
Yeah, maybe you also wish you had your own book. So Fotini helps Fortune 50 executives with high stakes negotiations and with team training. She teaches MBA negotiations at the Schulich School of Business at York University here in Toronto. She's also a regular guest on CBC, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review. And she's a recipient of the Top 40 Under 40 Award. Welcome, Fotini.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into our discussion, I just wanted to give a shout out to Gina Alexandris because, Fotini, you and I met at her Career Conversations book club where you were invited to speak about your book. And since negotiating is such an important skill for my audience, it's a game changer actually for lawyers and architects and other professionals, and often something, honestly, shockingly, that they're not really well trained in. So I figured it would be a great topic for our podcast listeners.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, Gino's is lovely. And I love talking to folks who find immediate application for negotiation skills.
Mm-hmm. And that was a fun book club. So in your book, which by the way isn't like these old MBA books that I remember that just put you to sleep, this one this one is full of colorful stories, and so it's an entertaining read, even though you're learning a lot as you go. And Fatini, I wanted to ask you specifically about one story that you shared. The story about how you couldn't just use the same messaging that some of your peers were using in your field because it just didn't land the same way when you used it. And I have a lot of coaching clients that they hesitate. I can see their potential and they hesitate. They don't put themselves out there as leaders because they don't really, I guess, feel that they see themselves out there. They don't see people who look like them, act like them, sound like them, in whatever way they identify themselves. And that sounds like what you're describing. So can you talk a little bit about how do you come up with your own authentic negotiation style?
I mean, it's really about choosing the principles that are going to work for everybody versus the principles that are going to work for some, and then applying those principles in your voice. So what I learned, the story you're referring to is I was following a script. First of all, I was the only woman on my entire global team who was doing the job that I was doing, who was traveling around the world training people on how to be more effective negotiators. I was 10 to 15 years younger. So there was gender issues and there was age issues, and I had a name that people couldn't pronounce. So there was all sorts of issues attached to that as well. And then I was given this script to follow, like I was mimicking what everybody else before me had done, but everybody else looked and sounded a lot different than me. It was a lot of older men with British accents who received very differently, with some gray hair on their head and so on. And I just found by, when I said the exact same words that they did, I got very different responses because I had the privilege of being able to watch and observe what they did. I watched them execute this exact same script. And then when it was time for me to do the same, even though I had rehearsed with them, even though I knew exactly what to do, I got in their feedback and so on, it just didn't land the same way. And that is consistent with all of the research around negotiation, about bias in negotiation. And so I was living this research. And even when I raised it to them, they were like, no, it's probably something you did. I'm like, no, it's not something I did. This is the circumstances that I'm walking into versus the circumstances that you're walking into. And so what I realized was I could still apply those same principles. It was, challenging people's thinking and showing up credibly and all of those things. But the words that came out of my mouth would get a different response. So when they said, the running joke of what I did at that time was I walked up to this group of strangers and I said this very first line of, "Are you the negotiators?" And of course, all 8 strangers nodded their heads yes. And then the next line that I heard everybody else say before me was, "We'll see." And when they said we'll see, there was a bit of a, okay, well, what's this cheeky person saying now? But they still followed him down the hall to get started. When I said we'll see, and I said, follow me down the hall, we'll get started, I could hear them no more than 10 steps behind me, very loudly, using some pretty rough language. Did that bleep and bleep just say we'll see? And I was like, well, no one was cursed at when I watched this 7 other times. No one had ever been given that level of disrespect until I came along. And so what I realized was that we'll see was meant to be a bit provocative. It was meant to make people slightly uncomfortable. I realized I could make people slightly uncomfortable without even having to go that far. So my style was to not even say that line. Just me showing up in a power suit as the authority was uncomfortable enough for them that I didn't need to take it to that next level. So it was about being authentic to me and going, I don't need to piss them off. That's not the response I'm trying to evoke in someone. So what in my voice is going to make them so uncomfortable that they question, who is this person that's in front of me, without making them lash out at the person that's in front of me. So it's the principles of showing up credibly, of being authoritative, of all of those things. But authoritative coming from me might look really different than authoritative coming from my male peers, because they're used to seeing the men show up in a power suit. They're used to seeing the men walk up and say certain things. They're not used to it from me. So for me, the lack of a smile was odd enough for them that I didn't need to use the will see line. The lack of a smile from a man is not weird, but the lack of a smile from a woman, because their expectations of me were so different, that lack of warmth was so different, that I went, okay, here's my voice now. Here's the version of I need to bring to the table in order to create whatever it is, that gravitas and so on, that is going to come from them. Now I've since learned to take it even a step further. I've learned that I can smile. I've learned that I can be myself. I can let my hair down instead of pulling it back into a mean lady bun kind of thing. All of those things I'm starting to play with even more, because I show up with so much more confidence and authority that I don't have to play those silly games. I can be more authoritative without even having to do some of the tactics, if you will. So when it comes to finding your authentic voice, is I don't want anybody to pretend to be someone that they're not. What I do want them to do is show up as their best self, and that will start to come through in spades. Because what I've learned from all of the behavioral science that I read now is that you can psych yourself up or you can psych yourself out. And when you tell yourself, I deserve to be there, when you show up like you deserve to be there, when you strike the power pose and so on, that is something that is going to carry you so much further than trying to follow someone else's script. Now, there are still guidelines about language that is used that is going to be more persuasive or less persuasive, but it's not about mimicry anymore. It's not about trying to fit into a man's world. It's about going, what is the best, most confident person that I can bring forward in my wardrobe, in my voice, and so on, that is going to get me the best results.
Mhm. And I love how you say that actually it's still changing. The not wearing the mean lady bun. That's a funny expression. I've never heard that. Okay.
Well, I think about it as that woman on Cheers, BB Newworth's character
Y-
Lilith. This is
Yeah.
dated because I'm sure a lot of generations have not seen that show, but it's that severeness, and I don't need to
Yeah.
be severe.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting that it keeps evolving. And I was actually going to say, I think that you need to experiment. To what you're saying is you sort of need to try something. You need to start somewhere, and and that's how you learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And there's a little bit of, I think, in what I'm seeing in my clients is there's fear
Yeah.
in doing that and putting themselves out there without feeling, confident that it's going to work out for them.
There's a lot of fear attached to negotiation in general, and or putting yourself in a leadership role. There's fear of damaging relationships, there's fear of failure and being criticized, and sometimes we have to just power through the fear and go, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to learn something, I'm going to progress, I'm going to get a little closer. And do I know anybody that's ever been perfect? No, I don't know anybody. If you know a perfect person, I'd love to meet them, because they're like a unicorn. So we're not working on perfection, we're working on progress. And if you don't put yourself out there, you don't make the progress.
Yeah, and, just start somewhere is actually one of my favorite expressions. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is, you know how if you do your ideal client profile, you have the A's, the B's, the C's. Start with the C's. Go
Yeah.
out there and try and just use the C's to practice
Yeah.
and learn.
Find those low risk environments where you're not
Right.
worried about the failure quite so much. Absolutely. I tell people all the time when it comes to negotiation, call your telecom company. Call someone. It doesn't matter if they hang up on you. They're not going to drop you as a client. It's okay.
Yeah. Any practice is practice.
Yeah.
Mhm. So that Career Conversations book club was only a few weeks ago, but I have already been referring coaching clients to your wonderful book. And not only is it eye-opening about what works in negotiation, but you generously provided these structured templates to help with the advanced preparation. And I'm a big fan of advanced preparation for negotiation meetings. And you make the point that actually any kind of communication can be seen as negotiation because somebody wants something and somebody wants something else. So it's not just restricted to contracts and proposals.
Mhm.
Um, so, preparing for negotiations is especially useful. I mean, I would imagine for people who are or consider themselves introverted, quiet, shy, and they don't have that instinct of responding in the moment to someone challenging them.
Mhm.
Right. So, so that type of exercise that you're recommending throughout the book about the advanced preparation, learning the skill to do it and using the templates, I think that type of person would benefit greatly from it. So I'm wondering if you've advised people who fit in that type of category and if you've seen how the power dynamic has changed for them in meetings from before and after trying out these types of exercises.
So the first thing I tell people when it comes to the introversion versus extroversion is, think of the name of my book. It's called Say Less, Get More. So introverts can rejoice. Shy people can rejoice because there is value in just shutting up. And in
Mhm.
fact, I would say it's some of those more outspoken, talkative folks that need to learn the discipline of preparing for negotiation and they need to learn the discipline of self control to not keep talking all the time. I'd say on the flip side of it, if you go back to the introverts or the people who are more shy or maybe who aren't quick on their feet, those are the people who feel like they're going to have a lot of regret after because they go, I should have said that in the moment. But instead, I would caution them to think about how can they find more time and space in the moment. So it's being able to own that time and own that pause to say, I need a moment to think about that. Having the courage to go, I need a second to digest that, or give me a second to write that down, and just giving themselves a time to think it through versus feeling like that moment's going to pass them by. If you need more time to be contemplative, like if you think about, disc personalities and all of that kind of stuff too, people who are more analytical take the time to process. People who are more extroverted tend to think and talk at the same time, and that can get really dangerous. Whereas the folks who need to process time just take the time, own it, and say, I need a moment before we move on. I need a moment to think that through, or I need a moment to write that down and take the actual action of writing it down just to buy yourself that time to think, to have the thought flow from your brain to your hand, whatever that's going to take to process a little bit longer, or to take the liberty to say, I'm going to have to digest that. I'll come back to you in a week or a day or at the end of the day or so on. And that is completely legitimate as well. So you're opening the door for yourself to be able to walk through it later. But more importantly, just give yourself the time now that you need in order to be successful at it. For the extroverts, it really is learning how to shut up. And that for me is a bigger weakness than not speaking up, because there's power in saying less as long as you frame it in a way that can make it powerful. So whether it's showing that physical body language confidence that I deserve to be here and you're going to have to listen to me, whether it's framing that I need a moment or give me a second, I'm not finished yet, finding the courage to say those types of words, to take the time and own that quiet, because we don't have to steamroll through everything. It's actually a much more efficient conversation if both of us take a second to pause versus thinking and talking at the same time and potentially talking all over each other. Those are not necessarily the greatest of negotiations or conversations, but the ones who are more considered, who are more measured, those are going to get greater outputs. So it's kind of like understanding the mindset first, and then the rest of it will come naturally.
You're right. So my spouse is Gary Wise. He's a lawyer, and one of the things that he has been teaching lawyers in his office for years and years, because this always comes up when, when they're early on in their careers, is how do I handle it if I don't know the answer? And he's like, well, you say, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
that's what you do. You say, I don't know. I will get back to you. I'm
Yeah.
going to look into it. And actually, that's a thoughtful answer because it
Yeah.
means that you thought their question was important and valid. And actually, it requires a little bit of research or looking into something.
Yeah, it makes people feel acknowledged to go,
Yeah,
oh, they're going to take the time to look into it for me versus someone faking their way through it or not
right.
really answering the question. If you're going to talk for the sake of talking to make it look like you're answering my question, but you're not actually giving me an answer, that's actually less satisfying than someone saying, you know what, you deserve the appropriate information. I'm going to take the time to do that. I'll get back to you by such and such time. And then when you are so credible that you do get back in such and such
Yes.
time, now all of a sudden you're winning massive credibility points and massive power.
Trust
Yeah.
because you actually did what you said you would do. Totally right. So, and I know that the preparation steps that you outlined, they have a lot to do with thinking about what the other person wants out of the meeting and thinking about what you want. I just was wondering if there's something that you can do to prepare for handling personalities, because this comes up a lot with my clients, right? So if they're quiet and they're shy, but the other people in the room, in some industries, it's still very male dominated,
Mhm.
and they may be very authoritative or loud or, used to being in that power position. How do they prepare themselves for people who tend to speak over them or tend to speak louder or tend to not give them space in the conversation?
So, one of the most effective ways to do this is to practice, is to actually role play. And maybe it's role playing with your phone and your camera. Maybe it's role playing with someone else. Oftentimes, when I'm brought in to consult on real life negotiations by corporations, when they bring me in to work with their teams on high stakes scenarios, one of the first exercises I have to do with them is role play. What has happened in the past? So, taking the time to think about what kind of person am I dealing with right now? Thinking about the people involved. What is the history and the precedent of this particular person? When you can tap into that and you can predict some of that behavior, what happens is you're now preventing the fight or flight mode from coming later. So you're preventing that moment of deer in the headlights to go, what just happened? What do I do? What do I say? Like, for example, when I was first starting out and I was going down to Texas, deep in the heart of oil and gas country, and there was a lot of misogyny down there. There was a lot of bias. And someone who looked and sounded and was as young as I was, I literally walked in the room and someone said to me, what are you going to teach me, little girl? And that's one of the less colorful stories that I have to share. So, but the thing is, I went in there going, okay, I know this is going to be the most abusive of scenarios I'm going to walk in with. These are going to be the most abrasive people I'm going to expect. I've heard, all of these other things before. I've heard horror stories from other people. So when I can anticipate that, my brain, when it hears it, doesn't go, oh my God, what do I do? It goes, oh, it's exactly what I expected. And because I expected this and I prepared when this happens, here's what I'm going to do. Now there's some muscle memory in my brain to go, this is what I want to do in this moment. So you're preventing those moments of panic and shock, and you're now able to actually help yourself in that situation. So it again comes down to this level of preparation. What is the type of person I'm dealing with right now? What is the history like? If they say something inflammatory, like what's my worst fear? What's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that they can do? If you can think about that in advance, it takes the sting out of it. And now you're prepared to actually follow through with that moment of what would happen. The same way that if you get in a car and you think, what's the worst thing that can happen? I can get into a car accident. Well, I'm going to put my seatbelt on. And now I'm preventing a lot of potential damage, or I'm going to be on alert for pedestrians and this and that. You're preventing all of these things from happening because your brain is ready for all of those things. And so we do the same thing. We just need to think about all these things. And then the mindset, again, will help us to do that. There is a really cool study that took what could be negative stress and turn it into positive stress. So I think her name is Dr. Kelly McGonigal, wrote a fantastic book. It's on my bookshelf called The Upside of Stress. And so I can't remove those stresses, but what I can do is turn that energy into something more positive. So if I'm really nervous about something, if I know I'm dealing with a really difficult person, instead of saying I'm so nervous about this, it's taking that same energy to go, I am so excited to show these people what I'm made of. I am so excited to show them this level of preparation that I have done. I am so excited to share with them this work, this proposal, this whatever it is that I've put together and see what their reaction is. And so when you do that, what they found was there was a really cool study that was done where they took at Harvard in 2013. They took three groups of people and they had them sing Journey's Don't Stop Believing in front of a group. And that is something, singing in a microphone is something that a lot of people are scared of. I'm no stranger to a mic, but I know other people are. And so they told the first group, regardless of how you're feeling, I want you to tell yourself, I am anxious. And they told the second group, I want you to tell yourself, I am excited. And they told the third group nothing at all because that was our control group. And what they found was, according to a computer that measured each singer's volume and pitch, the group that told themselves, I am excited, outperformed the other two groups. And we know it wasn't because they were better singers. We know this because they also outperformed them on a math test and a speech test, all because they psyched themselves up instead of psyching themselves out. They changed their performance, they changed their brain capacity, all because of a simple mental pep talk. So if you can prevent all of that stuff from happening, if you can change your brain energy to go, I know these people are going to be ahead of me. I know I'm going to be dealing with jerks, people who are going to interrupt and so on. So I'm going to have a plan for interrupting. I'm going to have a plan to share how excited I am about this. I am excited to finally conquer this beast. And when you tell yourself that and you anticipate those scenarios, it all sort of comes together in this synergy of making you perform at a higher level. So your brain doesn't kind of like fits out on you. It's going, I got this. I know what to do in this moment. And I am going to perform at a higher level because I'm mentally prepared for this. And I'm turning that adrenaline rush into something positive instead of something that's going to drain me.
It's all about mindset and empowering yourself to see things differently before you go in, because once you're in, it's too late.
Well, I mean, there's ways to salvage it, but it's much easier to do it in advance, right? Like it's much easier to put on the proper running shoes to do the race than it is to try and catch up after you're out there barefoot type of thing.
That's
But it
good.
really is about making sure that you take both of those things. Like I can tell people, there's a running joke in my business where people are like, can I just put a bug in my ear and you tell me what to say when I walk in the room? And that'd be so much fun for me. But without the mindset piece of it, it's going to come out a jumbled mess. So you really do need those two things. You need the level of preparation, but you also need the mindset to go along with it. Otherwise, it's just going to come out a mess.
Right, because then they will read it from your body language that your words don't match with your level of confidence from the way you say the words, from the way from your posture, from even your volume,
Yeah.
the way you're holding your body.
And your brain doesn't have the time to convince itself that these words are okay when it's coming from your ear straight to your mouth. But if you've taken that time in advance, it's like your brain's already done that work. And so it's a much smoother transition.
And one of the tips that you shared, I loved because it surprised me, was put your what you want on the table first. Don't wait. And I kind of have a history of watching people always wait, and that, as if that's the power tactic. But you flipped it around and said, no, put what you want on the table first. And how does that change things?
Yeah, it's a weird one to me because I don't know what publication it came from or what philosophy it came from, but it feels like one of those old school things. Like when I see Alec Baldwin in movies when he's in slick back hair and a power suit, and even on 30 Rock and stuff, it's those are the types of things where they say in these pop culture movies, you don't want to be the one that speaks first. Yeah, but like you're missing out on the opportunity of first impressions. We know at a subconscious level first impressions are lasting impressions, so why wouldn't I take advantage of that? And so it's not about caving in, it's about setting the bar. And so I hope people think of it that way. When you can make that, when you can put your proposal on the table first, you are setting the bar of expectations of where people need to rise to the occasion. Now, the reason why people are afraid of that, in addition to the bad advice that they've been given over the years from pop culture, is they're worried, especially women who come from a disadvantage or folks who come from a disadvantage, they're worried they're going to undersell themselves. Like, what if they were going to give me more? And odds are they weren't. Like they weren't going to do that. If you're worried about underselling yourself, then do the preparation to do the research and know what is appropriate out there. If it's a salary, understand what are competitive salary rates. If it's a proposal for your business, what are competitive rates out there like? What do you want out of this and what can they afford to do for you? If you've done that level of reflection and research, then there's no reason why you should be worried that you're underselling yourself. The other fear is, what if I ask for too much? And again, if you've done the research, the risk of that is so minimal. And on top of that, if you are doing it in a collaborative way, if you're saying, based on this research, based on my knowledge of your industry, based on my experience and so on, here's what I would expect for this. Now, this is a collaborative way of saying, third party objective information. Here are the expectations, as opposed to, if you don't do this, I'm going to walk out or else. That's a very demanding way of, the banging your fist on the table type of approach of negotiation. Yeah, that could backfire. But I never advocate for that in the first place. So if you're doing it in a credible and collaborative way, there's very little risk of you going too far and pissing them off, because that's the fear. If you're doing it in a prepared and researched way, there's very little risk of you underselling yourself. And so why not use that opportunity of first impressions, anchoring, that lasting impression, like an anchor on a boat. You drop the anchor on a boat so you don't drift very far from here. If they had a chance to anchor first, you're now trying to drag that anchor away. That's how our subconscious brain works. Those first impressions are lasting impressions.
Well, and when you speak first, putting your wants on the table, that communicates confidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you ever tell people to overshoot if they're going to speak first?
Absolutely. So I tell them to be aspirational. We still need to stay in the world of credible. But let's say, for example, you're aiming for simple numbers. You're aiming for a salary that is $100,000. You've done your research and you know that you should be paid somewhere around $100,000. So you're going to go in there slightly higher than that. You're not going to ask for 200 because that wouldn't be credible. For you to go
Right.
in there and asking for double the going rates or to come down from 200 down to 100 within minutes, it just doesn't seem like you're somebody I should take seriously. But if you're going in there and saying 112, 117, some unround number that makes it look like you have done loads of research and so on, those numbers now are just high enough to go, maybe I did undershoot myself and they're going to give me more than that. And if they can't do it, then I get to follow up and say, well, what can you do? And I'm going to end up a lot closer to my target as long as I start a little bit higher. If you don't start a little bit higher, you're likely going to have to give up something because people need to feel like they got a good deal. So that means you need to start with something and finish somewhere else so that they feel like, oh, I managed to work her down to something. It's kind of like if you get some great piece of clothing or something like that, and someone's like, oh, I really love your sweater. I got it on sale. We're so proud of getting a great deal. And the same is true in negotiation. We build satisfaction by giving people a great deal. You need to leave yourself that wiggle room in order to do it. So you start aspirationally, not while still maintaining your credibility. You're not going to go over the edge of going too far. And what is that number? It's not a specific percentage. It's really how far can you go credibly? What would your reaction be if you were in those shoes? What does the history and precedent look like? Those are the things to ask yourself, but it's that credible aspirational point that we're starting with.
When you were talking earlier about, you know, um, trying to think ahead to what does the other party want, it made me think of an important tool in coaching, which is having empathy, sort of spending the time to have that empathy before you're even in the room,
Yep.
to understand what that other person is feeling. So what does that say to you? I mean, the role of building that empathy muscle for your skills as a negotiator.
Yeah, there's so many reasons why empathy is important in negotiation. Number one is if we're going to have this type of collaborative negotiation, and even if it's a short-term transactional one, and I'm never going to see them again, people want to negotiate with people they like. We like people who seem trustworthy. We like people who acknowledge us. And that empathy is acknowledgement. It's not agreement. So people confuse empathy to go, if you said, I don't know, your book is too long. And I'm not going to agree with you and go, yeah, my book is too long. I don't think it is too long, quite frankly. But I'm going to say, I can appreciate why you would think that. I can appreciate that you don't like to read for a really long time. That's not me saying that you're right and saying my book is too long. It's just I'm acknowledging what you've said to me. And that is the empathy to say, I can understand that it's going to take a long time to get it done. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong what you've just said, but just that little acknowledgement goes a really long way to make someone go, oh, I've been heard.
Yeah.
And that's all people really want. So it gets their defenses down a little bit. It makes them warmer. It makes you seem like someone I can trust because you're listening as opposed to steamrolling all over me. But the other element that it does is now it forces you to be a better listener, for one. And even if you're thinking about it before you go in there, it's now information that is powerful because information is power. So I've now spent time thinking about what does the other person want? What are their values? if I take that time and I use that information to now to my advantage, I can come up with better solutions that's going to make them want to agree with me. I can frame things in a way that serve their values while I'm still getting my objective served. So it's really thinking about it in two ways. One is to build the trust in the relationship. The other is you need that information to come up with an appropriate solution. How can you do it if you've not thought about what's in it for them?
Yeah, love it. So moving on to the power of the pause. You use this a lot in the book. And this specific point aligns so nicely with, well, with my training as a coach, because, well, what we learn as coaches is that when you pause, you activate your inner wisdom as opposed to self-sabotage. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a story about somebody who might not have been comfortable pausing, taking your advice to do this, sit through the discomfort, and then how did it go?
So I love that you framed it that way, like tapping into your inner wisdom. I run these intensive workshops with folks sometimes where we're in training all day, and I can recall one time a client said to me, "I just got an email from my buyer. I don't know how to respond to it," and I said, "We're going to cover that today, so just wait, and we'll make sure that you have an answer to this question by the end of the day." Just the inadvertent waiting of not responding immediately, the buyer had already responded and solved their own problem. Just in the act of not jumping into a response with that other person made them come to the table with a better solution. So
Mhm.
it's maybe it's this discomfort because I feel like when I'm asked a question, I need to respond immediately. I feel like when something's put on the table, I need to have a reaction. And it's counterintuitive. This is the unconventional piece of my book. It's counterintuitive to just sit back and do nothing, or to put a reaction out there and wait before you do something about it. And so, but it's that time, that taking that time to think through what is the best course of action versus being reactive. Because when we're reactive, we think and talk at the same time. We haven't thought through all the consequences. We are in fight or flight mode. And if we could just find that mental pause, that ability to allow the rational thought to come back in before the emotions take over, that ability to think clearly instead of thinking and talking at the same time, to be more measured in the way we're going to deliver our message instead of saying something or flubbing it in a way that might aggravate the person on the other side. Those are the things that are going to help us to be more succinct, to be more efficient, even though that sounds weird too. Why are we're pausing and we're going to be more efficient? Because you're not making corrections. Even in the form of email, if we want to respond right away, oh, but I forgot to mention this thing. Oh, but I said it in this way and it was misinterpreted. So now I've got to go back and forth 10 more times to fix that misinterpretation. All of that could have been solved with just taking your time to pause and think through, where did that question come from? What is the best course of action? How can I phrase this in a way that's going to seem collaborative instead of being misinterpreted as combative or sarcastic or any of those things? We need that time, that mental energy to be able to do that. It's not something that we're very quick at, we're very efficient at. Even the people who think they're really great on their feet, they could be even better if they took that time to think things through.
So just walk me through what that looks like for somebody who's not used to taking a pause, the restless energy, and they feel like that need to have that, quick reflex in a meeting where they're told you need to pause and actually trying it out. What does that look like?
So if someone is saying, we want this and this done, okay, that's an interesting proposal. Give me a second to work that out. And so maybe you're writing it down. Maybe you're pausing to go, walk me through how that would play out. And now you're just asking a question. The pause could be while they're talking. So if you're really uncomfortable with silence, you could stay in silence while you force them to fill the silence. Right. So just get them to do the talking and fill that void and give you information, valuable information in the process, or force them to also sit in the silence while you take a note and you say, I need a moment to think that through, or I need to make a call, or I need to send an email, or I need to look into that before I give you a definitive answer. That's not something I had considered. I need to make sure that I'm, giving you the appropriate response before we have to go back and I don't want to have to take my word back on something like that. So it's just going, I need a moment to think that through could be the simplest way of handling it. And you take that moment. You take as many moments as you want. You're writing things down, you're doodling, you're sitting there looking at them, thinking about it. Maybe you're looking at the window because it's awkward to make eye contact for all that long. It's totally fine too. There's so many ways to go about it. But if you can get more comfortable with the silence, that will make them less comfortable with the silence. And what happens when they're less comfortable with the silence is they will break the silence. So they'll
Right.
either do it in offering you more value or asking you a better question or making a better proposal or reflecting on the fact that maybe they put something out there that was too difficult for you to say yes to immediately. So they're going to have to back off of that after they hear what comes out of your mouth. All of these things work to your advantage if you can own that silence. And owning it means just saying, give me some quiet time to reflect, or owning means tell me a little bit more about that. Where did that come from? How would that work for my organization? Just asking any one of these generic questions to get them to do some more talking and make them work harder to give you more information to convince you and to convince yourself themselves that what they're asking for is not good enough.
So there's a few different skills that go behind the power of the pause. I mean, there's the ability to ask questions, the ability to listen, the strength of character to just ask for that moment. Is there anything that you can suggest to people to do so that they can strengthen that ability so that when they're in the moment, they can ask for that or they can ask for that time?
Practice it during low risk moments. So if you're having a conversation with your partner at home or your kids or a friend or whatever, when your friend or the counterpart says something, can you count to 3 before you respond? The next time, can you count to 4? Can you get comfortable with silence and see what happens when you're not immediately jumping in? Odds are the other person's going to keep sharing and sharing and sharing information because that's a natural response. So someone's going to fill the silence. If it's not going to be you, it's going to be me. So, can you get comfortable with that in these little everyday scenarios where there's no risk and there's actually only benefit? Because when you give someone else space, they feel really good about spending time with you. So you can actually build relationships by doing this. And if you can get used to just that counting to 3, or like, one of my former clients was a medical rep. And she said, whenever I would go in there, she was a sales rep who had to go talk to doctors and so on. She said, every time I wanted to talk, I took my pen and I'd try to break it in half. Can you do something to make that mental energy go somewhere else instead of it coming out of your mouth and your tongue? What are those little challenges that you can give yourself on a day-to-day basis to build up that muscle so that it becomes much easier when you're in the room under higher stress?
Amazing tips. Um, Fotini, is there anything you want to add?
I mean, I think every time someone asks me a question like that, the number one takeaway I want people to know is that there is so much confidence with silence if you
Mhm.
own it. And I would love people to think about, what are you missing out on when you're not stepping up and advocating for yourself? What are you missing out on when you go, I'll just let them have this one. I'm not going to speak up for this one. It's not worth it. When you add all those little opportunities up, it makes a world of difference. So I would love people to just reflect on that the next time they go, I'm not going to negotiate this one, or I'm not going to speak up now. What are you missing out on every single time that happens? And if you were to add those up over the years, what would that mean for you in terms of where you are today and the level of satisfaction you have?
What a great point to add. And the thing is that's, sort of deceptive about thinking about it that way is that every time you have a success, it actually is incremental. It's not that
Mm-hmm.
it just adds up. It's that you would have had an opportunity to grow that success,
Yeah.
right? Same thing as money, right? Sitting in your account, it's not the same amount of money just adding up. It has interest on it.
There was a study that I refer to over and over again where they looked at women who negotiated salaries, and only 7% of women negotiated their first salary.
Mm.
And they found that those who did increase their numbers by an average of 7.4%. And another study took it a step further and went, okay, what if we gave a person who did negotiate and a person who didn't negotiate the same salary increases for the next 35 years? That person who did negotiate now gets to retire 8 years earlier, all because of that first singular 7.4% negotiation. So when you think it's no big deal, it's what you just said. It's that compounding of
Yes.
all of those little big deals that will mean 8 years of early retirement or more, eight
Yeah.
years of not having to argue with someone, 8 years of stress that you can avoid. Those are the things that I want people to think about. Those little decisions that you make every day can have a massive impact. So why not step up and speak up for yourself?
Fantastic. And I will add to that point that if you see yourself as, as I described in the beginning of this podcast, many people don't see leaders like themselves out there. If that's you and you do speak up and you do sort of screw up the courage to do these things, then you sort of become that role model to help other people because then they'll see themselves out there.
Yeah,
So use
absolutely.
that as your why.
Yeah, that's a wonderful why to have. I mean, I've had students say to me when they chose my class over somebody else's class, somebody who was an older white man with white hair, they went, "I needed to hear from someone, if you can do it, then I can do it."
Right.
Right? And that is so encouraging for me because now they're going to do it, and how many more people are going to see them doing it? It's a domino effect, and what a wonderful legacy to have.
Mhm.
And so why wouldn't we want to do that?
Thank you so much, Fotini. This has been a wonderful interview, and I'm excited for our listeners to get something out of it.
Well,
So,
thank you
to
for having
our
me.
oh, pleasure. And to our listeners, if you are interested in learning more about Fotini Iconomopoulos, please go to fotiniicon.com. You've been listening to Get in the Driver's Seat, stories about leadership moments in small to mid-sized professional practices. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, practice management coach at Beckor Management. Take care, everybody.